Hello, hello, hello. Today I'm talking with Matthew Skelton. We talked about the shared language of music, bringing things together and cutting words as part of book writing. I'm Yves Hanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello everyone, and hello Matthew. I think that's how I should pronounce your name, correct?
Correct. Hi, it's good to be here.
Hello. And here, let's immediately show on camera what here means. In my case, this means Ghent in Belgium, Europe, and you're in the UK, in Leeds, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yep.
So yeah, that's a lot of miles away. And how is it time zone wise away? It's a couple of minutes after 9 o'clock in the evening. And what's it on your side?
I get 1 extra hour compared to you, so it's just after 8 here.
Yeah, so I'm in the future, basically.
I can learn from your mistakes, right?
Exactly. So, well, yeah, yeah. Let's not go too much, but in the politics, the UK can learn from Europe's mistakes. Yeah, we can do a lot of that. Yeah. Matthew, before we jump into the questions, what is something you want people to know? For the few people that don't know you, who are you?
So Matthew Skelton, and I actually see myself these days as exploring holistic innovation. The world is changing very rapidly around us. Politics is changing, climate's changing, regulations are changing, all kind of things are changing very rapidly, far more rapidly in some respects than it has done before. And that's related because technology is changing very quickly in response to the economic and business climate. Organizations that do not take on an innovation mindset are going to be left behind, are going to fail, are already failing in multiple different countries. And obviously taking on an innovation mindset then means we need agility, we need to be nimble, we need to expect to experiment and learn, and so on and so on. So we're bringing kind of agility type practices to the entire organization, whatever we're doing. And so my background is originally in software engineering, and then I got into things like continuous delivery. So I ran a conference for 5 years. I ran a meetup group for about 7 years, all around continuous delivery, and then started to think about kind of DevOps and flow and organizations and teams and kind of stewardship boundaries of code and so on and so on. Wrote the book called Team Topologies, which is what I'm most well known for at the moment. But I've just started work on another book, which relates to the continuous stewardship of services and things that we build. And I'm doing a lot of work at the moment around innovation, like whole organization innovation and innovation ecosystems, because that's ultimately what these kind of techniques, like team topologies, like continuous delivery, like agility itself, are useful for. One of the great things is to be able to navigate this very changing landscape. So yeah, holistic innovation is where I'm heading. I'm known for being the co-author of the book Team Topologies.
And in the future, known for the next book.
We'll see. Yep.
Well, we're only as famous as our next thing that we bring out, in a way. But yeah, thanks for it's a very nice introduction, and indeed, yeah, that's it's interesting when I literally reused your book yesterday again in a discussion with a colleague, and I said, okay, and I gave him a copy of the books. Like, I think you might want to read up again on it. And I almost instantly regretted, because I'm like, maybe I still want to re-look at some of these things before. But yeah, I like the book, and yeah, it makes people think in a different kind of way. So yeah, that is for me always interesting. But yeah, that's let's jump into that first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
There's quite a few things. I think the most obvious one, actually, for me, thinking back, is that originally I didn't really have any particular intention of getting involved in IT or software. When I was at school, the aim I had at the time was to get into music as a performer. So I did the musical exams in the kind of conservatoire and what have you, and I got to a reasonable level. I was aiming for the kind of exams that you get to when you enter the conservatoire, and I really enjoyed it, and I still play music now, but like, you know, as an amateur. I started learning the trumpet a few years ago. Back then I was playing the flute, but then I don't know, something clicked, or I had a change of heart or something, and I decided not to go down that route, and instead to go down the route of computer engineering and robotics and things like that at the time. But I think that awareness, so love of music, but also awareness of playing it, awareness of being in a small group of musicians playing something.
And when you say small group, how many people are you talking about?
Well, anything from like 5 or 6 people through to like an orchestra or a jazz band side, which is maybe 30 people. So something that's still relatively small. Using
your book, multiple topologies of collaboration in a way.
Well, I think playing in musical groups, really feeling it like that, helps you to realize that you know, it takes a mixture of different kinds of things to bring together to produce something that works together as a whole. And you need to be able to have trust that those other people are going to play in a way which works really well to produce something holistic. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there which I think has informed my approach to what I do around innovation, and particularly around team topologies and things like that. But I think there's some. It's a feeling often. Like if you've not actually been. Do you play any musical instruments? Have you played in like a band or something like that?
I played guitar when I was the typical teenage years, and I had played in a couple of tried to play in a couple of bands, but I didn't really do much with it. But I have actually a lot of friends who are professional musicians still today. And in this podcast, I have interviewed, I don't know how many agilists who are playing instruments or who have some background. It's I think in IT there's already quite a lot, but then it feels like in the agile community there's like a lot more that have some kind of still playing, connecting, but have learned so much about teamwork, about collaboration, about so many different things. So.
Yeah, definitely, and it's hugely valuable. And I continue to learn. I guess, about kind of playing together and so on from doing the IT and organizational focused work, but also learn about how to do that sort of work from playing in musical groups as well. So it's I love it. I love doing that, and it's two very different worlds, but there's things to learn and share between these two different worlds, like world of work and the world of music. Like there's stuff to learn and share. In fact, we were just talking between a few of us recently, and as you indicated, like some of the people that have been on this series have been working in agile, but also musicians. Turns out loads of people inside our little network, our core team, are also into music and play or have played in the past. So we're sort of half jokingly talking about getting a band together at some point. Like when that will be, you don't know, because these people are spread around the world. Maybe you have to meet at a conference and bring like extra luggage, like a bass guitar and whatever, to go and play.
Or have the conference foresee. I know that at Agile, the East European conference, there have been a few gigs where Alexei Krivitz and Robin Diamond and a couple of others have played some. I think even Henrik Nieberg joined in. So there's really like people who've never played together, but there were instruments. I think most of them didn't bring their instruments, but just the conference foresaw some instruments, and then people jumped in. And
nice. That would be great.
I think, that's for me. That's indeed, once you've been at a certain level, and I'm definitely not at that level myself, but once you've been at a certain level, if you know how to interact with people, and of course you had to have some knowledge of similar kind of songs or whatever things that you want to do.
It's a shared language, right? So if you know how to play jazz, or you know how to play blues, or you know how to play classical, or know how to play whatever, rock or like thrash metal or whatever it is, it's a shared language. And I think that's one of the key things. Like, clearly, one of the things that people talk about the Team Topologies book is it's a shared language. And so I think maybe having experience like how to use a shared language and develop a shared language in musical performance, that was kind of maybe influenced that aspect of the book. I don't know, but it's certainly absolutely essential. Like, you can't just get the best classical performer together with the best thrash metal performer and expect them to immediately work. They would have to work together to develop a shared language first, and then something good might come out of it.
Yeah, I think that's, and I think that's something we also see sometimes when we have developers and testers or whatever kind of different kind of people in our IT world have to work together. You have to find ways to at least understand each other and find, like you say, a common language. That is indeed something I do recognize as well. It's I didn't think about it at that kind of way, but yeah, music is definitely a shared language, and that really helps once you know each other, or once you know the similar kind of language, then it's kind of automatically allows you to communicate in a way that probably brings in other ways that you wouldn't be able to understand each other if you've never had that that shared language. And is that something, for example, when you do workshop or other kind of things, that you sometimes see that it can help you to explain stuff if people are also musicians or something like that? Is that something you've noticed outside of the music then?
I don't know. It's good question. Maybe. What we definitely noticed with Team Topologies is that, for example, there's a crossover between the Team Topologies ideas and ideas from things like domain-driven design. A crossover between Team Topologies and things like what used to be called DevOps, so all of the movement around bringing development and operations together, because that's where the Team Topologies work came out of. But also a crossover, like I said, between Team Topologies and domain-driven design. I was just talking to someone like a few hours ago. He came to a masterclass that was run at a DDD conference in Europe like last month, I think. It was run by two of my colleagues. So I helped to create the masterclass, but then two of my colleagues ran it. And he was super enthusiastic about it. And he said the Team Topologies ideas really immediately resonated. It made a lot of sense because he was coming from a domain-driven design perspective. That's almost like two languages that are quite similar, not quite the same, if you like, but lots of overlap, sort of comprehensible somehow, a bit like, I don't know, Spanish and Italian. Like they're close enough in terms of origin that people can kind of understand each other quite well. Whereas,
and that usually helps is if it, like you say, if the language has a single kind of background. At the same time, I also noticed that sometimes it can backfire, because Dutch, for example, has a very similar thing, or sounds a lot similar to German for some people, and actually it's so different that actually it's sometimes hard to understand, because some words sound the same but actually mean something else, and some other words like, where is that coming from? So there might be an overestimation what people understand. Last time I went to Germany, my partner, not last time, my partner once gave me a gift for a weekend in Germany. And it turns out she organized everything by fax. So that tells you how long ago that was. And everything in English by fax. And when we arrived there in that small little village, literally nobody spoke English. And we learned that the hotel, everything that my partner sent in English was translated by the daughter of the owners, but she was out of time that weekend. And so literally nobody understood us. And when I tried German, because I had, as a Belgian, it's one of the official languages. I had like 4 years of German in school, but I was really bad at it and I knew it. But when I tried to use some of that German, they literally told me, I don't understand Dutch. And I was like, okay, I'm going to stop using that. So that really resonated so much with me, like, okay, it's so different and I think I understand it, but no, let's so there I can see a danger in that. And at the same time, I recognize what you say, when some of these languages, when you know a little bit of where they're coming from, if the languages all are coming from Latin, for example, and if you know some Latin, then you can understand some of that.
I mean, I actually quite enjoy learning languages, and like spoken languages. Like I did German until I was 18 at school. Did French at school. More recently, like in about what was this now, like 12, 14 years ago, I was learning Greek, modern Greek, and I'm sort of just started a little bit to learn Hebrew as well. But using like Duolingo, so it's not like it takes a long time, right? But I think I've got an interest in language, particularly about how different perspectives. I understand, for example, that in Japanese language, the way that you think about constructing the sentence is like very, very different, and even things like the way in which you form the words depends on the shape of the object. So if it's a tall water bottle like this one here. Hang on, I'll put it in the frame. It's a tall water bottle, then the way in which you think about constructing that sentence will be different. Like, I don't know the details, but the way that languages work can give you a very different perspective onto something. And I think that's then true with something like domain-driven design and team topologies. It's a particular language, and it's giving you a different perspective onto something. And that's sort of deliberate. So maybe some of that came through as well when we were writing the team topologies. But of course, my co-author, Manuel Paes, is originally from Portugal. So he speaks Portuguese. He also speaks Spanish, English very well, and so we brought about 6 or 7
ideas from multiple languages, and
exactly.
that I can definitely
see probably something in there, understanding about kind of, I don't know, different perspectives on how language works and communication things. There's probably something like that in there too.
I can definitely see that, and yeah, I've been using Duolingo myself to learn Ukrainian ever since the full-scale war started, as a kind of way to say. To say, okay, the Russians were trying to, remove that language from the earth, but trying really hard. And I was like, okay, I don't want that because I have friends in Ukraine, so let's start to learn it. Of course, I never speak, although I do work with people from Ukraine now. I didn't when I started, but yeah, I hardly have any conversations with them because using Duolingo to learn a language is good for some words, and depending on how would I say it, how much that language is used, the bigger the lessons are in Duolingo, then it's also a little bit different. So it's I think it's limited on how to learn it, but it's actually a lot better than how I learned it in school, because in school for me languages, they focus so much on writing and so much on, I don't know, how the verbs are created, but not on using sentences and talking. For me, it was only when I started talking and reading in English and actually having conversations in English that for me, my language skills improved. And if it's English or French, it's all.
And that's kind of interesting point, because like doing it in sentences is almost like delivering a thin slice of value to production, like we talk about.
Exactly. That's exactly. I never thought about it, but that's exactly it. You think something in your head and you bring it out, and then you get feedback like, okay, it doesn't pronounce like that, or it's I don't understand it. But yeah,
and you might not exactly understand exactly what you're saying. So, for example, like you might say, like in French, one of the first things you learn is like je m'appelle Matthew. Like, well, literally, it means I call myself Matthew. But you don't have to know that immediately. You don't have to know that nuance immediately. Eventually, you'll realize that's what it's actually saying, and that's how it's constructed. But initially, you just use it. You just learn it as my name is Matthew, and then later on, you can build up the additional awareness. So we like deploy that first sentence to production to start with, and then we iterate and we build up our learning later. I mean, there's clearly different ways of learning language, and learning the grammar kind of helps and so on. But a sense of being able to use something properly with other people early on is hugely valuable. Yeah.
For me, I do remember I don't think I was 15 or 16 something at a holiday in a camping place where I was literally translating between the French boys and the Dutch girls because they wanted to talk to each other and they were not able. And I literally had exams to repass for French that year. So I thought I was really bad. I was really bad at French. But just the idea that I could translate something, so not even a sentence that I made, but someone else wanted to say something, and I was able to translate, I started to see, hey, I might not be that bad. I can actually communicate and I can help communicate. And that feedback loop was so positive for me. That really helped me in understanding, hey, there's value. And I was not able to use the correct words and whatever, but in a way, both parties or everybody understood each other, and that was the value.
Yep.
And like you say, the more you do conversations, and then you hear people saying something in a certain language, and they say, okay, that's how I should say it, and then I can translate it, because understanding when someone says something in French was, of course, easier than talking myself, but hearing it really in conversations helped me. And I guess that's probably the same for, I definitely it is for DDD. I think also for team topologies, when it starts to become a language, when people start using these things, it's for me the same for every pattern language that we have, where people think about, once we have a word to explain a certain pattern, that helps to basically, instead of explaining a full set, it's like one word or one sentence that basically we understand, like, okay, that's the kind of thing. And I think with musicians, the way I see it, you said it a little bit similar like that, is if you can say, okay, we'll play a blues piece, then everybody kind of knows something, and they know it's different than jazz, they know it's different than punk, even if you might use similar kind of notes. If it's blues or if it's reggae, it definitely has a different feel to it. And then you can say, okay, play that part, but now play it reggae. It's almost immediately a language that every musician will understand. Even if they might not know how technically to do it, they will understand the idea that's behind, I think, right?
Yep.
Wow. It's so wonderful how, indeed, talking about how music influences us in all kind of things. So thanks for sharing that story.
I'm also a lot of this stuff is about shared mental model, or I mean, some people don't like that phrase, but like we've got a way of thinking and representation of a particular thing. Whether in music, it's about blues versus reggae. In spoken language, clearly it's about the ideas, but then the rules of that particular language. But and in some spoken languages, it's easier to think of some particular thing compared to another. Like I said about the Japanese thing, there's ways of thinking that actually are easier in certain languages than other ones. And then when we're talking about like writing software and building digital services, at that level of kind of like business services that most people are working at, then what we're really doing when we're writing code is exploring sort of mental models, exploring representation, exploring ideas, like exploring the extent to which we've got a shared mental model and a shared language, effectively. Like all the stuff in domain design is very much about language and semantics, meaning of things. And then when you commit it to code, that's like you're saying this is the version of our shared understanding that we are going to work with. But there's a lot of technologists who just say, I'm going to write some code, I'm going to make this computer do some stuff. And at certain levels of the stack, like if you go right down to the hardware or the firmware, clearly, yes, you're manipulating bits and bytes and I/O lines and ports and all the rest of it. Fine, but as you go up the stack towards the kind of business applications, then it really is about effectively agreeing on a shared language, a shared understanding of the concepts, and that's why it's madness to measure software development in terms of keystrokes or in terms of lines of code committed. Because it's
we should find a way. Yeah, it's about number of IDs we get across and on all kind of other kind of things in a way.
It's about the fidelity of the representation somehow. Like how well are we representing these concepts, and are there any, if you like, mistakes or discrepancies in how we've tried to represent these concepts? Because the discrepancies in representation in code leads to security problems typically.
And GB Rainsberger in this podcast also says, like, it's also about how easy are things to change. So if you want to make a decision, make the decision that's the easiest one to change. Because, okay, we will make mistakes. And if we don't know if we need to go left or right, well, if it's easier to change right to left instead of left to right, let's go to that direction. And then we know we can always change later. Because in many ways, sometimes people want to say, okay, it should be fixed. It will never change. We know, like you said, like with your new book, the world is changing, so there will be changes. The problem is we can't predict which ones. We know that part of the code is wrong or won't be sustainable in the next 10 years. We just don't know which parts. And then there's people who try to predict that future, but that usually doesn't work very well.
So there's some techniques for predicting the future, right? Things like Wardy mapping are amazing. Like once you learn Wardy mapping, you don't want to see the world in a different way. And it's a super technique, so straightforward and simple conceptually, but so powerful. But clearly it's not a prediction. It's still build that technique itself is building shared understanding, and it's helping people to think things through, but it's still not actually predicting the future. It might help with decision making, but still, given that the future is then uncertain, then we definitely need to keep our code easy to change, just like you said. So
and I think all these kind of techniques help to have some kind of I had the word there, I can't come up with it. Some different kind of abstractions at that different kind of level. And code, C++ is totally different than it used to be in assembler. But then once you start talking about domain-driven design or patterns or all these kind of things, that's again another layer of abstraction. Maybe not yet in code. Maybe later on there will be ways that they can do that. And with your team topologies, it's actually abstractions at team level that also have an impact on how code is written or these kind of things. Yeah, wonderful. And I think the same could be said about if you have a 6-piece band or you have a 30-piece orchestra, it's different kind of music that you will write for it. You will not have 5, like if you would use the same play for 6 people, play it with 30 people, you will not have 5 people playing the exact same thing. No, you will do it with different nuances and different kind of things. So that's also kind
yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's move to that second question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what could have become of you?
I do, actually. So there was a point in my life which was like a decision point, like a fork in the path, if you like. And I did a master's in music. I started that in like 2008 or 9, and I finished it in 2011. It's with the Open University in the UK, and it was a super experience, really great teaching, and good to meet other people, all remote, like pre-COVID, but all remote, because like that particular university has been remote since the very beginning, since the 1960s.
Wow.
Originally they distributed training materials on like video cassette and stuff like this, and so you got it through the post and you watched it, and then it was on the television, and obviously now it's all online.
And was there a way to communicate with other students, or you were just learning it on your own? No,
we had regular, because it was 2008 2009, whatever, we had online classrooms and things like that, and sessions with a tutor and stuff like that, and message boards, like bullet, web forums and things like that. And so I did that master's in music. I learned a lot, but it was focused. The particular research was actually focused on blind and partially sighted musicians and how they can get access to research materials, like super niche, but because it dived into kind of topics like access to information and accessibility and a bunch of other things that were quite interesting for me at the time. Anyhow, I got quite into that, and I actually pitched for a research position at a university in the UK, and I went for the interview, and then the professor who was in charge of that research program said, "Matthew, you have to come on this research program. I want to offer you the job." So at that point, this was back in like 2013 or 2014, something like that. Mm-hmm. So I could have gone down a route which was actually academic research, and I decided instead to kind of continue with the trajectory around IT and what eventually turned into things like team topologies, and now more recently into the kind of innovation aspect. But I've always retained an interest in
what
research.
What triggered you to go in that path? Because you're literally offered a job, if I'm understanding correctly. So what then triggered you to ignore a job in a way?
I guess it was probably partly about money, because obviously research doesn't pay as much, typically speaking, as aspects of IT. It felt maybe a little bit narrow at the time, a little bit too specific, but I have retained an interest in research. The Team Topologies book has got loads and loads of references in the back. I think we've got about 250 different references, and actually all of those references are available on the Team Topologies GitHub page in a repository there. And for someone who's like a researcher, they can access all of the references in a special kind of research format, which means that they can bring it into their research tool and find the same articles and references and things like that. So I think the masters that I did in music, the techniques helped us to pull together a very solid foundation underneath the Team Topologies book, and make it connect it to the real research, if you like, which otherwise, some people don't have that kind of background and awareness of how to bring research into a piece of writing like that. So it was practically really useful. But also it's interesting. I did a workshop for the leadership for the research and development R&D division of one of the world's biggest pharmaceutical type companies recently. So I was in London doing that. And these people have all got PhDs. They've all got PhDs in pharmaceutical whatever and chemistry and this and that. I mean, whoa, this is amazing. And I said, look, I've done a little bit of research in the past. I know a little bit about it. I actually spent a year as a laboratory technician. So between school and starting at university, I actually spent a year as a laboratory technician. So I was cutting up eyeballs, like bulls' eyeballs, and making.
Oh, okay. That's,
preparing all the chemistry
even
experiments.
A completely different kind of thing.
Exactly, it was great. I learned a lot there as well. And then I went through a few of the other things, and these folks, they're there with their PhDs in chemistry and microbiology and whatever, and they say, well, actually, Matthew, the way that you've talked about your approach to things sounds a lot like you've got a good approach to R&D, like research and development. And so I think, although I didn't go down that path exactly, I think I've kept some of that, some of those techniques, and it's actually ends up proving really, really useful when I need to write something new. For example, when I'm thinking about pulling together a summary or whatever of material, I've got a huge database of existing materials that I've saved, and I can search really easily and pull together quotations and that kind of thing. But just that approach to kind of caring about existing published material and making sure that I acknowledge it, I think has been, I mean, for me, it's the right thing to do, but it's proved really valuable because people then see that I'm acknowledging acknowledging their existing work. And I think it's important for me to acknowledge the work of people who have gone before, like standing on the shoulders of giants, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I definitely can see that. But yeah, like you say, you learned, basically what I'm hearing is you brought ways that you've learned about research, but yeah, also about what you did in music, and that kind of ends up in who you are. But yeah, for me, it's interesting that for you, it was a real conscious choice, because I have many people here who sometimes say I could have done that way. And sometimes it's more stumbling upon things and not really a conscious decision. But if you really are offered a job,
I've done loads of stumbling. I've done loads of stumbling.
I assume like many of us, but when you're offered a real job, it is a conscious decision to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And I can imagine, you have to be really strong on an idea, on going somewhere to say, well, the way I see it, and maybe I'm wrong, but the way I see it is, if you say no to something, for me at least, I need a strong yes for something else before I can say no. So that is a rather conscious decision.
I mean, I might end up doing some research in the future. Let's see. It's not going to happen anytime in the next few years, but I've got my eye on. I'm looking at some opportunities in that kind of space, because I think there's some really interesting research that could be done around organizations and flow and cognitive load and making organizations more humane and a load of stuff like this. Maybe the use of AI tools comes into the mix as well, in terms of like augmenting human capability. I don't know, something like that would be for me would be a super interesting thing to explore. But yeah, it's not going to happen in the next couple of years because I've got too busy with other things. But maybe I'll get to the point where I can do that.
But that's the nice things about the way we're stumbling on our careers and doing things on the side. And sometimes there is an idea that is, like you say, it's kind of like it's too early, but that keeps growing in your head. And then there might be a moment that it's actually to say like, okay, I will now do it, or maybe not. Then something else is coming.
Yeah.
I want to move to that next question. What do you consider your biggest challenge, and why is that a good thing for you?
So my biggest challenge really has been how to put it. My biggest challenge is really about seeing what my strengths are, I guess. Until recently, I wasn't super clear about what they were, and so I felt like I had to get involved in lots and lots of different things. I mean, like, practically speaking, my biggest challenge, I've got loads of ideas, but there isn't enough time to execute on them. And
the problem that almost every company has, like, there's more ideas than so setting priorities.
Exactly. But recently I've been doing some leadership coaching, which has been super useful, and has helped me to actually really be honest and aware of the things that I can bring, or the things that I have consistently been bringing at particular points, the things that have been most useful to other people. And I mean, what I'm aware of now is I think I'm able to look at lots of different aspects of a thing, whether it's a machine or whether it's like a social thing, like an organization or something else. Look at lots of different perspectives and kind of construct a different way of looking at it, which is clearly, like, Team Topologies' book is a different way of looking at the challenge of, like, kind of certainly software delivery at scale, and arguably it's a way of looking at knowledge work at scale as well, because we've found people using the Team Topologies book in legal services and healthcare and education and a bunch of other places too. And like, it's almost like, for those of you watching the video, it's like these kind of 3D glasses. Where is it? And they're like these with the blue and the red lenses. So like in the old style cinemas, you put on these spectacles with like blue and red lenses, and then you could see things in 3D. And it's a bit like that, like providing a different perspective on something, maybe with some terminology, maybe with some diagrams, maybe whatever it is, a different language. While to admit to myself that I wasn't particularly good at running a company or doing the finances or a bunch of other things like this. But now I'm super happy to say we've got a load of amazing people working inside my businesses, and they're starting to be way more effective now that I'm not trying to do the stuff I'm not very good at. So that realization, then, to be honest, one of the most important things in this space is self-awareness, and being aware of where your strengths are, and then being happy for others to do the stuff that they're way better at. So we're starting to see that come through. I'm starting to see that come through now. Is stepping back, allowing people who've got other strengths and capabilities, and just empower them to get on with that stuff with some guardrails or some mission. A few boundaries, a few well-placed boundaries, and then most of the time they can get on and do that stuff far better than if I were involved.
And you want to keep doing it, or you want to, I do feel that, and in a way it keeps you growing. Again, I've heard it also. I've coached also some other people where sometimes you see that, but I have to do this, and this is thing, and maybe it's something we invented or whatever, but sometimes people want to keep doing something where actually for outsiders it's already clear, like, this is not your strength. Why do you want to keep pushing you to become better in something that doesn't bring you energy? Because that's what's in most cases is happening. It eats up energy for trying to do something. And it doesn't matter if we invented it, or if that's a career path, or if that's something we aimed for. If we actually try to do it and it doesn't work, then usually, but it's, for many people, rather hard to let go. I don't know how hard it was for you to let go some of that.
Oh, it was super hard to let go, but it became easier and easier the more self-aware, I guess, I became. And the more I had, I guess, kind of approaches and, if you like, tools, but mental models or whatever to help empower other people in a way which was still aligned to what I care about. So like we came up with some kind of approaches to localized autonomy for how we run the business. So this is an approach that sits above OKRs. So OKRs, so objectives and key results, and that's fine for a certain level of tracking. But we came up with something which sits above that and is much more long term, like the metrics and targets and things inside our framework is much more like almost permanent, or certainly like might change a little bit once every year, something like that. But then provided a way for different parts of the business to have the confidence to act with autonomy, or substantial amount of autonomy, while still being aligned to the overall goals. So we're still working on that. We hope to actually open source it at some point and make it a thing, a framework that others can use too. There's lots of work to do on that yet, but it's been working pretty well for us at the moment, and it's very collaborative in the way that different people define the boundaries and the guardrails and things under which they're happy to work. So we're quite pleased with it so far. But getting to that point was really valuable, because I can say, okay, well, if people are working in that way inside that area, then I can let go. I can be happy.
And I can definitely see that. And that is all kind of automatically answering that second part, why is that a good thing for you? Because then you can let go stuff and you can focus on things that at this point bring you more energy. And then, so yeah, that's and that in a way kind of moves also to that next question, because I see you're passionate, and the way you talk about the different kind of things, there is a lot of passion, a lot of drive. Do you know where that drive and that passion is coming from?
Yes, it's coming from a sense of fairness and justice, I think, ultimately. Certainly a sense of a need for things to be humane, so organizations that are humane, that have humanity in them. I'm not sure whether we used that word inside the Team Topologies book or not, but it was there underneath. Like when Manuel and I were writing the Team Topologies book, we see things very, very similar, in a very similar way. Not surprising, right? But we wanted to come up with a language and a set of patterns and techniques and things that could make organizations a better fit for human beings. This is like between me and him, this is explicitly what we wanted to do. I think we didn't emphasize it so much in the book for whatever reason, but it's what we're emphasizing much more now. So yeah, that care for fellow human beings is definitely a core driver for me.
And in a way, you talked also about DevOps, because that's is definitely there as well. I think in the way people have that. I've interviewed Patrick Dubois, who was one of the people who coined the name. Actually, a friend of mine living in Ghent as well, or close enough, I would say, to Ghent. And I know that for him, that the way the culture is and the way things are for people, that definitely was a drive as well. And I see that I would say in many people, like trying to make the world a better place, whatever that means, because the way I want to make it a better place might be not the same as what you want, but together the whole community moves it in a better way, for at least for the way that people care about that. So that is something. And you, so when you say it about that, is that something you recognize, like you know where that's coming from? Is that something you were taught when you were young, or is it something that you felt yourself, you were helped by people, or do you know what triggered that or kindled that kind of way of thinking about the world?
That's a really nice question. This is all getting very personal, and
if you want to share, right? You don't have to.
No, it's fine. It's fine. This is like on the psychologist couch. But yeah, I mean, I think I was had a very strong kind of ethos and kind of sense of justice from my parents and from the people around me when I was growing up. And I think that stayed with me. So it's definitely very, like, it's a very central thing for me. Like the way that I'm running my businesses is very much with an intent to share any commercial success with the people who are closely involved. I'm not in business to extract as much money for myself as possible. And some people are, and well, that's up to them. But like for me, that's explicitly not how I want to run things, because it doesn't seem fair or just. So it does spread into like how, literally how I'm running my businesses and how I've been running them for the last, what now, 10 years. I'm not saying we've had massive commercial success. I would like to have more commercial success, but anyway, like the way I've been running them has been with that intent for about 10 years.
Yeah, and I think, well, and we all need money at some level, so it's not like we're doing everything for free. I don't hear you say that, but there is a level at which more money doesn't make that much difference as having a better life or having other kind of things, a way of helping people. I think that's also a little bit what I'm hearing, is that it's and I think, of course, what I also hear you, and maybe it's not true, but I want to check. In a way, I'm hearing you say that, of course, the commercial success helps spreading the ideas, and the ideas will help people to create a better world. So in that sense, success is important, because then these ideas get spread and the world is better. But that doesn't automatically mean that you need to be, you need to become a millionaire for spreading these kind of things. And actually, what I've sometimes see is that when people, it's finding that right balance. If you ask not enough money, people think, oh, there is no value in it. But if you ask too much money, then people say, yeah, this is too expensive. I'm not even going to try looking into that. So it's finding that balance, that people care enough about the concepts to pay money for it. And it's a little bit both of these things. Well, and talking about success, what do you consider your biggest achievement? And maybe before we jump into that, what I've noticed is that for people, basically this is your moment to brag. And is that easy for you, Matthew, to brag, or to take something and be really proud of? Is that easy for you?
That is another great. Have you done any work in like psychology? Because these are brilliant questions. For like, you've done coaching, haven't you? Right. So this is.
I've done coaching, and to be fully fair, I did 2 years of therapy training. So in a way, I did learn something. But I'm really amazed about these questions, because I invented most of these in that order like 10 years ago in like less than 5 minutes. And I'm still amazed. So, but
they're really great.
We got sidetracked.
It's super. I think it's brilliant. So I'm definitely proud of having co-authored the book Team Topologies. It's had a big impact. We've sold 160,000 copies or so, which is huge for like a businessy type book, and it continues to sell really well. But what I'm really most proud of is the way in which we've managed to, I've managed to kind of attract a big growing crowd or community of people who are really passionate, who really care, who have human beings for whom human beings are really important, where humanity is important, and where people are really willing to be involved and try and make useful things happen in this kind of space. So we've got there's an amazing like community of like employees, but also independents, so contractors and people around all the work that I'm doing. There's some people who are working, who are giving extra time without charging us for it at the moment, because they really believe in the mission.
Wow.
And excuse me. So I guess the thing I'm most proud of really is having pulled together, or having been part of this amazing community movement to try and make a huge difference in how how organizations work, how work works inside organizations. You know, it starts inside IT. It's now spreading out into other kind of knowledge work as well. People are enthusiastic. People believe in the mission. It started with Team Topologies, but we've been doing work outside of that as well, or complementary work off to the side of Team Topologies that complements it and comes at it from a different perspective. Things that connect through to psychological safety, things that connect through to organizational development, and so on and so on. A bunch of related kind of ideas and approaches. And people are, there's a growing community of people who are super passionate and really committed, and it's amazing to be part of that. So I think that's probably my biggest achievement, really, the thing that I'm most proud of.
I can imagine, because it's I think a lot of what we do in the agile well, that agile community is rather big, but it has so many different kind of flavors and so many sub communities, and at some point they split off and then they join again, and then working in different kind of ways. Sometimes it feels like, okay, people are kind of contradicting each other, but or fighting the brands or whatever. But for me, there still is a lot of community around, and I see myself and others being in many of the sub communities, trying to build on all these things, and like you said, standing on the shoulders of each other in many different kind of ways. And that's for me is so nice when we create some kind of thing where other people believe in and say, hey, this is something that helps me and that I can use to help others. And yeah, in a way, for all of us having a bigger toolbox in a way. Because sometimes people say, yeah, I want just to use this tool. And for me, and that's a little bit what I'm hearing as well, is like you say, okay, I have team topologies in my toolbox, but now with that new book, I'm actually adding other kind of tools to that toolbox. I don't want to be just known for the team topologies and just doing that. No, I'm interested in bringing other kind of things. It reminds me a little bit of what Jim Benson said when I think he said that to me, I think in the year that he wrote the personal Kanban book, or a year after that, or something like that. It's like, I'm already busy on the second book and thinking about the third book, because I don't want to be just the personal Kanban guy. I want to have multiple things, and I don't want to be known for just that tool and that ID. And that's a little bit what I'm hearing with you as well. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a huge amount of really amazing stuff in team topologies in the book and in the principles and things, but there are other dimensions to, let's say, organizational effectiveness, or to how knowledge work can be better. There's a lot of other dimensions too, which deliberately are not in that book. Like, even if we had the space, that Manuel and I had to cut out 30,000 words before it could be published. We wrote 85,000 words, and there's 55,000 words in the book, and we had to chop 30,000 down. We actually recorded ourselves recently doing a walkthrough of those 30,000 words, because it's nearly 5 years since the book was published. We hadn't looked at it for 5 years. We recorded a walkthrough. So by the time this session gets published, we might have published the some of the video outtakes, snippets, whatever, from our walkthrough session. Anyway, but the point is that we had a very specific focus in there, and we say in a book, like, there's a whole lot of other stuff you need to think about. You can't just use that as like you can't just use the team topologies book as a complete approach to whatever software development or something. It's deliberately not. It's yes, a kind of coherent.
You needed 10 books to do that, and of course, you at some point you need to say, this part is part of that book, and that part, yes, it's important, but it kind of distracts from the team topology ID.
Well, I mean, personally, I don't think anyone should try and write a guide. Like, here's a complete guide to software development. That would be out of date as soon as it's published. Like, I think a better approach is to, I mean, you know, a guidebook or a template, what have you, for a particular time is useful, but then it's not going to be useful for very long, because the world will have changed quite substantially. By the
time you finish that book, then the world is already, yeah.
So like that's why we wanted to do. That's why it's partly selfish, right? I don't want to spend a couple of years writing a book and then it's out of date after a year or two. I want to have something which is going to last a decent length of time. I think it's fair to say team topologies will probably last at least another 5 years, probably 10, maybe longer. We will write another book in that series. Manuel and I will write another one together at some point, kind of extending team topology in some way. But there are other aspects to this whole, I don't know, knowledge work, effective knowledge work in a humane way. There are other aspects to that which are important to me, and yeah, I've started work on these things already.
That's nice to hear. I had no idea, and of course now everybody's looking forward for these other ideas and the second version, or whatever the workbook or whatever that is going to be called. But yeah, I see that with many people, especially once you have an idea that you worked on so hard and there's a community around, there's people loving it, then of course you get inspired, and you think about other ways of spreading that knowledge and how people could be helped. So yeah, in a way, that's very nice to hear that is going in that direction. So thank you for sharing that, or giving us a kind of preview of whatever that means that could come up. Let's move to that next question. Do you have a personal agility tip to share?
I'm going to share one tiny one, and then one that's probably a bit more useful. The first one is I've recently started taking the entire of every Thursday for like focus time, because I was really missing the ability to get into deep work. And so I know I've got one day a week basically to get into work that needs deeper focus. So no meetings get booked in there at all. It's just me working on ideas and things that need working on that aren't going to get distracted. And therefore, like today, look at my calendar now, it's a complete mess. There's like 17 different appointments on that I've had earlier today.
And then both of us were cut off. I don't know what happened. Okay, but you're here back, right?
Looks like we're recording again. Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I had like 17 appointments in my day today, and
wow.
Sometimes that's what you need. You need to meet people and talk to people, and that's fine. But then it's nice also to have some focus time too. So that feels like a nice balance. I think the possibly the more important, or the one that has more impact, is actually being part of a community or networks or multiple communities where you're plugged in to knowledge, awareness, new developments, new ideas, this kind of thing, and building that and selecting a sensible number of these networks so that the information comes to you and you don't always have to go and seek the information. And therefore you are able to react much more quickly, because then you're effectively increasing your awareness. You're using these networks as a way to sense what's happening in the world, sense some trends, sense what we might need to focus on, where maybe my knowledge or awareness is lacking, that kind of thing. Expecting to need to learn new things, but doing it through multiple, like a network of communities of people that you trust effectively, and they're going to share things, and in exchange, I'm sharing things back into the networks as well.
It reminds me of something I heard Chris Matt say at some point. Like he said, when he explained to me, I don't know, at the conference, where he said, okay, there's multiple sessions, and I was tempting to go together with him to a session. And he said, no, it's much better if we all go to different sessions, and then in the break we talk to each other and say, hey, this was interesting, that was interesting, and that way we all learn. If we're in the same session, yes, we can discuss about it in a way, but we all learn the same thing, and we might miss out a great other session. And then Liz Keogh told me later, a couple of years later, she told me like, no, now he's actually sending people to conferences. He doesn't even go to conference anymore, and people go back to him and tell him like, hey, this was interesting, check this idea out. And it's like he's scaling it even more. And yeah, I like these kind of things. Like you say, networking and having things, because we all have limited time and attention that we can spend to learning things. And if the networks can tell us like, this is interesting and you can learn from that, that's in a way that might be also why I'm doing this, or that's one of the side effects of doing the series, connecting with people all over the world, where I'm doing it. Yes, I spend a lot of time doing it, but I do it from my own home. And so once this is finished tonight, I can just go again with my family, and if they would be already asleep, I still would sleep in my own bed. Where if I would need to meet you in a conference, either if it's today we're recording it's Agile on the beach, if I would be there, then I could meet lots of friends, but I would also miss out with my family at this point. So for me, it's another way of connecting and learning. I like both of these ideas. I'm not sure if one is bigger than the other, because one day focus time, I think for many people it's almost impossible to imagine to do that. Like you say,
I'm lucky. I'm in a fortunate position to be able to decide that. I mean, it's my businesses. I can just block my entire calendar, and no one can book anything. So I'm aware that's a bit of a luxury for some people, but it makes a huge difference for me when the value that I'm bringing really is this, like I said before, this like looking at a topic or a theme from different perspectives and synthesizing something new. That needs that deep focus. So like the kind of work that I do, I have to have that time, basically. Otherwise I'm not bringing any value.
Yeah. And I think, well, for many companies, many CEOs, CTOs, whatever, at some kind of level, it is really, they need to bring in and do that focus and set, I don't know, a vision on where we want to go or whatever. And not many people do it because they feel somehow they cannot do it. And like you say, there are limits for not everybody being able to do. And still, it is a conscious choice to say, okay, I'll do it. Because I can imagine that every week there could be opportunities that are very tempting for you to do. But once you probably are in the habit of doing that for a couple of weeks, it's probably easier to say, no, if you want to meet, well, sorry, I can't do it. If you would have had the workshop, that day would not have been available. And now it's focus time, it's also not available. And that, I can imagine that, yeah, it's also a habit of doing that. So thanks for sharing it, because these for me are two really powerful ways of doing it. And let's move to that next question about remote work. And you already talked about being in a remote education way before COVID. Did you also do remote work before COVID, or was that something you discovered?
I've been doing remote work since January 2014. So like, what's that, 10
years ago? Or
10 and a half years now. So back then we started out using Skype, I think, as our messenger tool. And I don't know what else we had back then. And then moved to Slack and better tools like that. And I'm pretty sure that some of that early experience in remote working also found its way into some of the principles inside team topologies, because in particular, if we're working remotely, clearly, we can meet for an hour, maybe two, on a video call and work together on something. Fine. You cannot spend all day. You cannot spend all day working together on something. That just doesn't make any sense. That's when. So we're looking for the need to keep work back for when we meet in person. And what we do, I mean, it's actually, here's the thing, working on source code with version control, if you use a sensible version control system, like these days it's Git, but back in the day it might have been Subversion or something like that. You're using version control for source code forces you to think about the nature of the work you're doing and exactly which part of the part of the thing that you're working on. Because if you get two people working on the same part of the source code file and they both try and check that in or commit it to the version control repository, then you'll get a conflict. And so you need to have some awareness of, well, I'll work on this part up here and you can work on another part somewhere else, and then we won't get that conflict. And then you've already pre-agreed that your focus is slightly different. But then you might realize you need to come together to work on the same thing, in which case, if you're working in the same building, you would literally pair, you would sat next to each other and pair on that thing, which is then has other values too. Or if you're working remotely, you decide, okay, it's clear that we're heading towards a situation where we need to do this synchronously on a video call. Let's do it. And you get into this, working in that way, you get into this rhythm of looking for not just the the need to work together synchronously, but the opportunity, but also it's quite high cost to work together. It's quite draining on a video call and so on and so on. If you work across multiple time zones, it gets awkward with family time and whatever else. And so like that synchronous time becomes quite precious. It's really valuable, but it's quite precious. That made itself into the Team Topologies book as the collaboration mode, one of the three-team collaboration, team interaction modes, the collaboration team interaction mode. I mean, the way in which Manuel and I wrote the book was all remote. So Manuel is in Spain. I'm in the UK. We had done some work together. We did some work in Portugal together at the same client. We did some work in the UK together, a couple of other places. So we had worked physically together in the same location, but we also did a lot of work apart. But when we were writing the book, I think it was all remote. And so again, we were thinking, which bits can we write separately? Which bits do we need to come together and work on? And that way of working and thinking about knowledge work is massively valuable. So always in my head is it better to split this work now, or is it better to come together? And you just get, eventually, after working in that way for long enough, you get a sense of what that is, when to come together. For example, today we've been working on a report. We did some analysis or some interviews with a company that's had some real success with kind of agility and fast flow and team topologies and things like this. So we've been kind of showcasing what they've been doing. And we're in the process of pulling together the report, the kind of PDF. It'll be a downloadable thing and a printable, like it'll be the printed version too. Anyhow, working on that at the moment. So I was working we had some asynchronous conversation in Slack with a designer, my colleague. And then it was getting more and more confused and so on and so on. And then that just puts on the little light that says, hey, time to have a synchronous call. So we had a synchronous call and we sorted it all out. And then it's back to an asynchronous way of working. And so
basically what you're saying is you kind of better and better recognize the moment when, hey, this is no longer working, let's do it synchronized. Is that what I'm hearing?
Kind of, yeah. And being able to switch from being happy to work, you're switching from, you're always asking yourself, or at least I am, is it better, is it more productive and more effective at this point to work asynchronously because we might be able to make more progress, or to deliberately come together synchronously to effectively to resynchronize our understanding of this particular thing we're working on. In this particular case, it turned out that the designer hadn't understood enough that this was the first of a series of reports. And so therefore, some of my previous comments in Slack hadn't made sense to him. But then with that context, he was like, that makes more sense. Okay, now we can move on. And then and it's just like version control, because what we're doing, version control, we're doing work separately. And then on a regular basis, ideally every day, if we're doing continuous integration, we bring that stuff together, we see what works, we've got a synchronization point, and then we go back and do something slightly asynchronous. And I suppose that's a real, like, working in software with modern version control forces that way of thinking, or at least encourages that way of thinking. It should do, unless you're using a crazy multiple branching scheme and God, people get into all sorts of craziness. Anyway, if you're using these modern tools and having sensible working practices, then you would get into that way of working. You realize, look, we're trying to do the same kind of thing. Let's just get together either as a pair or as an entire ensemble and do it together. But then sometimes there is work that can be done separately, and sometimes maybe best done separately. But being able to recognize, is now a time for separate work or for together work, and being happy to switch from one to the other, even just like a 15-minute conversation, quick conversation to resynchronize on certain things and then back to a different way of working.
I really like that. And in a way, what you said also about if you're working on the same code file, at some point, sometimes you also realize, wait a minute, maybe I should split this into 2 files, and then we can work independently because what I'm doing is differently. And somehow I've seen that the architecture might change because of that, because it allows us to do much more asynchronously. and I've realized at some point, like, and it's actually a good thing, because the fact that two people try to work on something but differently, but it's hard because it's the same file. That actually might tell me a message about why is that actually in the same file, and why shouldn't I split it up, and are these, is that really a dependency in what the code should look like, or is it a dependency because of the way I've originally designed it, and we might need to refactor it in other kind of ways. So
and allowing those kind of human communication aspects to influence the design of, at least the design of IT architecture, but ultimately it's allowing it to influence the design of knowledge architecture, feels like an important thing. Like that should be a very conscious, very deliberate choice. And that's not particularly common yet in the industry. I think Team Topologies has helped us to understand that, with like the emphasis on Conway's law and things like this. And clearly there's loads of prior art or prior writing well before Team Topologies with people talking about similar things. Absolutely. But I think we're 5 years in 2024, middle of 2024, when we're talking now, there is, I think, in the industry a bit more awareness of kind of socio-technical aspects of building digital services, at least, or just knowledge work in general. And that feels like a good thing. Like we should be thinking about the relationship between people and whatever technology, in whichever form technology takes. I think it's important to have that as part of our design principles.
And a collaboration principle, because even today I said in a Slack message, like there was like 4 or 5 messages going back and forth between multiple people, and was like, okay, it's 5 times back and forth. This feels like this is the moment to have a video call, because there's some misunderstanding between 2, 3, 4 people. And once I see multiple these kind of messages, and of course there is more energy or more emotion involved, the longer it takes. At some point it's like, we might be saying the same, we might be saying something else, let's just get together and have a short video call. And then in most cases it's like less than 2 minutes, just like you say, I explained some context, it's clear, okay, we can split off again and do both of our work. And that's and in that sense, for me, well, you have been doing it for 10 years, but many of us have only, I done my first remote work in 2004, actually in the beginning of Skype, literally the beginning of Skype, because I remember an outage with Skype that literally we had no other way to contact the other people, because that's the contacts information we had. So we also learned, like, oh, maybe we should have some backup ways of communicating. But that's, many people have been only working for like 2-3 years remotely, and we're all discovering better ways. Luckily, the tools are way better than 2004 or 2014. But we're still, I think, in the beginning of these things. That's just, both the tools and the understanding and all these kind of things. So thanks for sharing that, because I think it's really an important way of looking at these things. Let's move to that next question. What is a book that you have read that you wanted to talk about?
Well, the book I've read is Empowered Agile Transformation.
And I think that's the one from Alexander.
That is exactly the one. That's exactly the one. And so I read this a while ago, but I reread it. We actually had a few days of really good weather recently in the UK, or at least in Leeds, where I am. So I was sitting in a hammock in the garden, reading this in the sunshine. It was really great. And I think it's a super book. I mean, it's a super book to the extent that the author, Alex Stokes, so she's coming to the UK later this month. And when I found out that she's coming to the UK, she's speaking at a conference in Manchester. When I found that out, I said, look, Alex, why don't we do something together? So we're actually running a masterclass later this month. It's the 23rd of July. So what's that, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? 4 weeks time, just less than 4 weeks time. we're combining the ideas from the Team Topologies book with the ideas from her book, Empowered Agile Transformation, to give a slightly different perspective on very similar themes. We've got a very similar intent. The intent of both books is to try and help nudge organizations to become more effective, more humane, more nimble, understand, like, sort of shifting mindsets on how to adopt a more truly agile approach, as in agile with a small a, not like big framework agile. That's not what, like, the subtitle of her book is Beyond the Framework. Like, there's been so many, I don't know, it's kind of disheartening to see the extent to which, like, agile now has a bad name, effectively, because so many people have had a bad experience with these massive, great frameworks, and you need to do this and you need to do that, and there's all these ceremonies and there's all this nonsense that you have to deal with because some big consulting firm has installed this big approach to doing software development, and it just feels horrible. Like, it's not empowering. So it's a super
and it's not agile in most cases.
It's not actually agile. But which bits did I really like in here? So here's the thing. Chapter 14, co-design and new structure. And that there's emphasis on co-design. It references the work of Marilyn Emery from Open Systems Theory, and the work that she and Fred Emery did over many years. Like, their work goes back to the 1960s, I think. And kind of very collaborative, participatory approaches to solving problems, which, clearly, like, at its heart, proper agile approaches are exactly that. They're team-based. We're bringing together different perspectives, and we're working on a problem together. But, like, taking that kind of approach out to how we might shape the organization and how we might do decision making and this kind of thing. One particular useful, like, concept from Open Systems Theory, the work from Fred and Marilyn Emery, is the idea of, let me get this right. I'm going to forget what it's design principle. There's design principle 1 and design principle 2. Design principle 1 is basically kind of hierarchical, bureaucratic organizations where it's all about keeping control and people should just do as they're told. And that's like one particular mental model. It sort of fits with theory X, theory Y, of how people are motivated. And then design principle 2 is where we're trying to empower people to have localized decision making and be close to the customer and all of this kind of stuff, which is what we would call proper kind of agility. And that fits with sort of theory Y from that approach, which is that people are motivated by being, kind of mastering their work environment and having a mission and that kind of stuff. I suppose this one of the things that this book, Empowered Agile Transformation, does is show a very different way of a different way of doing things to people who have maybe only experienced a very bureaucratic, very command and control, top-down sort of way of working. And it says, look, that stuff doesn't work, but big framework, so-called agile, doesn't really work either, because that big framework stuff is just fits into the kind of bureaucratic structure. So it doesn't actually produce agility. And if you really want to have the performance that is associated with true agility, then you actually need to empower people in teams, in departments, to look after services, to own that work, to go after that mission, trust them to be creative and intelligent and care about what they're doing. And they will. If your hiring processes if you're hiring for that kind of person, let that person get on and do that stuff in that way. So it's a super book to lay out a kind of roadmap or a picture of sort of all the moving parts, if you like, that you need to kind of have in place to enable that stuff to happen. But here's the key thing. It's not about a rigid way of doing things. It's about a set of key principles, and then almost like getting out of the way and allowing people to succeed.
I like that. Yeah, it's for me, and it's in a way also how agile got the bigger attention. I mean, the manifesto is about principles in a way, and so there's no frameworks in that, and that got way more attention than extreme programming or crystal clear or whatever was around at that time. And it's only later that Scrum really became very popular, and then all the other kind of frameworks. So in a way, that initial message was in a very similar way, I think, and that's and I think, well, it's not surprising. We've seen a couple of other books also in a way that what Josh Karyovsky wrote. In his latest book is also very similar for like, okay, we're talking about principles much more than you need to do exactly this or you need to do exactly that. I have the feeling that many more things are going in these kind of directions. Thanks for bringing that book to my attention, because it's a book that I didn't know. So of course, this pile is always growing with too many interviews doing. So I'm not sure how fast I will be able to read. But the way you explained it definitely puts it high up. When you
I've got a question for you about this. The books I can see behind you there, are they the books from people you've had on
No, not particular. Not okay. Particularly. There's actually a couple of them. Right? Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I can see the Vaughan Verne domain-driven design book. I can see Fearless Change. Some nice titles in there.
Yeah, thank you. But these are books that I've been working on or loving indeed. And some of these people I had here, but there's other people that I hadn't interviewed yet. But Fearless Change, both of the ladies I did interview already. So a lot of others as well. I wanted to go for me, one of the most interesting questions is that, especially after a conversation like this where we go in all kind of direction, is there a question that you think I should also ask you that I didn't ask yet, and if so, what's the answer?
I think I might have already slightly answered it, but it's really what are the underlying themes behind all of the stuff that I do, because like I've been involved in quite a few different things, and I've got like multiple different interests. Like what is there something underneath it all, if you like, which is coherent? And I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, partly because I'm in the process of launching like a or having a stronger focus on personal brand. So I'll have a new website, and I'll have maybe a podcast. I can learn from you about how to run one, because you've been doing it for a long time. And a bunch of these kind of things. And what is the underlying? What is an underlying theme? Because like I've done. Example: the very first place I worked, we were not using version control. I installed a version control system. Like, it was very early on. The version control worked by sending emails and reading the email attachment. Don't even ask about it. Like, this is super early on. This is like 2001. This is like well before any modern stuff. But even back then, I was interested in collaboration and helping to accelerate what we're doing, because there were times when someone would save a file to the file server, and then someone else would just overwrite it with their version, and we're like, oh, I've just wasted an entire day's worth of work. It's like I've been interested from at least 2001 in making working together more effective. Like I said before, like back in like 2011, I got into I gave my first DevOps talk in 2010 in Hamburg. I then started a meetup group in London around continuous delivery in 2012, built a community there, and then did a conference and so on. I've had this interest in ultimately about, it's something about making work more effective, but it's also connected to how the technology is changing. Because if technology was static, then we'd be able to come up with some patterns, and then they'd be universal and they'd last for a long time. But because particularly digital technology is changing so quickly, you've got different techniques. You've got kind of open source stuff. You've got Linux came along in the 90s, and so on and so on. Then you've got cloud, and you've got IoT, and you've got generative AI, and all this stuff. And the pace of change is increasing because it builds on the previous stuff.
Exactly, we're building blocks that we're using to change the. Yeah, I don't think there's many industries that have the ability to change that quickly, because we're writing software that is helping us to write software in a different way.
Exactly.
Like,
exactly. Yeah. And so that dynamic forces innovation. It forces, or at least it forces change. And there's a lot of innovation happening in that kind of space. And clearly, like you can build something which is not pure software, but it has probably telemetry. It probably has digital telemetry around it. You can use like logging and metrics and that kind of thing to check what's happening in a more physical service. So as a physical parcel is going through the delivery process, different people are scanning it. It gets scanned into the warehouse. It gets scanned as it goes into a van. It gets scanned as they deliver it to your house. And that scan is then using digital telemetry and everything else to then kind of manage the whole process. So it's like software in that case is enriching the delivery of the parcel, even though the actual thing itself that's moving is very physical.
Yeah, before it was like, we're sending you the package and we have literally no idea. It could be there in 2 days or 2 weeks. And if you want to know where it is, like, we don't know. It's not with us. We think and if it's something important, they might be making a few calls to give you some idea. And now they're literally, when things are delivered to my door, at some point I could see the car delivering it, moving in my street. Okay, they turned that away or turned that off for privacy and I don't know, whatever reasons. But they had very much detailed, and they probably still have detailed information about all these packages in ways that we'd never foreseen that.
Exactly. Or it could be growing food. So like in the Netherlands, next door to you grow a lot. There's a lot of food grown, like tomatoes, for example. Like the UK has loads of tomatoes coming from Netherlands. And modern kind of greenhouses or growing houses are like almost like a server room. They've got racks and racks of growing pods. Oh. And there's robot feeding and watering things, and lots of telemetry. We're measuring the temperature and the soil acidity and a bunch of other things, how damp the soil is, and that's giving us all this feedback so we can adjust things better. So yes, the product is still a tomato, like it's still very physical. It's a piece of food, like you can eat it, but the process of working with it has been somehow enriched by digital technology. So
because in a way, before, if they were growing tomatoes, basically they did it, and then at the end of the process, probably the farmer would taste a few and say, okay, this is good or not good enough, and depending on how he saw it, this is the moment to cut it. But he might be completely off for whatever reason. And what you're saying is, with the modern data that we have, we can kind of predict at what moment we will able to take the tomatoes and bring them to the customers, and I see that.
And it's neither good or bad. It just gives us different options, and it allows innovation in this space.
Exactly.
And so I think
some people might call it good, some people might call it bad, but that's always the case with all kind of innovations. Like some people like the old way of doing it. Yeah, exactly.
And actually, I've just realized the work that I did, that I mentioned about in my master's degree in music. So my work was, my dissertation was about, I'm trying to remember the exact title. I think it's how accessible to partially sighted musicians are research materials, and what impact does that have on performance, or something like this. And, digital technology, particularly screen readers that can read a PDF file or a web page or something like this, that's hugely valuable to people who are blind or partially sighted, because suddenly, like, go back, say, 30 years, if there was research materials, it would be printed. You'd have to get a braille version, like so something that a blind person can read, and that was hugely expensive, and it's very difficult to produce, and all the rest of it. So the fact it's digitized, then actually it makes it more accessible to a blind or partially sighted person, if it's digitized in a sensible way. And that was part of what I was researching, the extent to which the digitization was actually helping them or making things worse. But like that's a clear example where there's an innovation. It has certain, in that particular case, in many cases, then blind or partially sighted musicians have better access to the research materials. Therefore, it could help them do certain things that they couldn't do before.
I really like that example because many people don't realize that. I had that discussion, I think, I don't know, many years ago also, like thanks to the internet, that the blind people actually have, the people who have disabilities, they are able to read much more. And people don't always realize, yeah, but it's on the screen. Yeah, but indeed, with digital readers, they are able to read, or they could have it written out automatically and whatever. And that's just not possible with books, because then they had to all be fully translated. And yeah, there was just limited number of books translated, only the most popular ones. And now you can have your own equipment set up. Of course, the websites and everything has to be written in a way that is supported. In Belgium, I don't know how it is in the UK, but in Belgium, there's actually quite a lot of laws that force official organizations and others to have websites that have a certain degree of readability for all these kind of tools. And that actually opens up the world in a way that many people don't always realize it. Again, we talked about remote. I had a couple of friends who are very much into lots of different communities about diversity and inclusion, who said COVID helped so much more people to have access to work that they didn't have before, because of that they could work from home. And because if they were working in a wheelchair or whatever, they didn't have the possibility to go to a certain company, and now they could all do it from home, and they were just the same as anybody else. And by the time that everybody had to go back to the office, they had proven their worth, and that helped them to stay in company. Yeah. So I think this is a really important thing to stress out, how a lot of these interactions and innovations are making things more accessible to different kind of people that we don't always realize, because we don't need these kind of tools.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That out.
I think it kind of, ultimately, I think I'm interested in how in the value of applying innovation and innovation mindset across the entire organization. And I guess there's another strand to that, which goes back to the stuff we were talking about before. I'm interested in applying that to an organization in a way which then makes the organization more humane. I'm not talking about turning people into cogs in a machine. I'm interested in looking for opportunities where people can thrive in that context of innovation that we're going to need, that is needed in every organization now. But it's taken me a little while to realize that. I'm more aware of it now this year, and so that's from this point. That's kind of how I kind of what I've realized is the common thread, which is interesting for me and which drives what I do. And so it's great to have found that. I wish I'd been aware of that a few years ago, but hey, it's nice to be aware of it now.
Isn't that with I just had a discussion with I don't know, a 30-year-old or something like that. It's like, we were discussing 16 years old and things like that. It's like, no, once you grow older, you're much more aware of some things, and the older we get much more aware about some things and how things are in the world, and we kind of don't value anymore, like value of what other people think of, I don't know, how we dance and things like that. That was the discussion about, like, when you're 16, some people think about how will people think what I'm dancing, and actually when you're older, you realize everybody was thinking what other people are thinking of me, but nobody was thinking about other people dancing. Like, and that's a little bit. The older we get, we value much more, for me, more valuable things and more things, and of course we all wish that we in a way that we could speak to our younger self and say, pay attention to that. And probably, at least I know with me, I had some role models around me that were telling me you have to pay attention. I was not listening because I thought, like, old person, I don't value that in a way. Is that similar to you?
Yeah, probably. It certainly makes a big difference being more self-aware and I guess just more confident that that I know, I guess, where I can contribute better, and I guess then identify what other people's strengths are, and understand how they can contribute as well. So yeah, I'm very glad to be more aware of, I guess, what drives me, and therefore, like, I'm zooming in on that thing at this point.
Yeah, I can definitely see these kind of things. So thanks for sharing again, but because it's these kind of things, and like you say, it's making the circle go round again, because all of these things are very much connected, which is something I've seen in many of these interviews, that they're all going in different kind of directions, but somehow all these answers are linked for these people in many different ways. So that's very similar with yours here. So thank you for that. I want to move to that last question. Who do you think I should invite next?
So I think you should invite Alex Stokes, the author of the book that I talked about before, Empowered Agile Transformation. I think she's super and loads of experience. The challenge you might have is time zone, because she's normally based in Australia. So
I've interviewed a couple of people in Australia. Then I was like, deciding if we'll do it at my night time or their morning or whatever. But that's. But again, like I said, I can do it from my own home, so that's much better. Actually, it's one of the countries or parts of the world I definitely want to visit. But if I do that, it's not going to be for a couple of days. Then it's definitely for a month, or I don't know. If I have to travel that long, I definitely prefer to stay there for a while.
Yeah, for sure.
And indeed, that's a good idea. When you're discussing so passionately her book, I was thinking, like, it's a good person to actually to connect with, and so that is nice. Thank you for doing that. And I think you had another person in mind as well, if you still remember.
It's entirely possible.
I can bring up a picture that if I have the right picture. Do you know who this is?
Oh yeah, of course. Yep, Kate Tarling. So I met Kate, I think it was last year or the year before. She's also from the UK. She's written a book called The Service Organization, which is great, and talking about like what kind of principles and so on should we use to think about creating an organization to deliver services. Now, those services may have a digital component these days. Typically they do, but not necessarily. And what we're doing now, we're working together. Kate Tarling and I are working together on some new material around this need for kind of continuous stewardship of critical services, because the world in which we're living now, like, software is touching pretty much every part of our lives. If it's used for banking, it's used for tax returns, it's used for you might have like if you've got like health problems at home and with your kidneys, like you might have a dialysis machine at home which is cleaning your blood. Software is involved in that. So like, and maybe if you're like an old age pensioner and you're your house or flat is cold in the winter, you need to have some payment from the government to cover your heating bill. If the software service that is responsible for making that payment into your bank account, if that software service goes down and your heating is cut off, then you might literally die. And this has happened. So software and digital services now are literally life and death, increasingly literally life and death in many situations. And so I think, well, Kate and I think there's a responsibility to reset on the risk on how we should think about doing this activity around these digitally enabled services. Because if you go back to the 90s, when lots of these kind of software principles were kind of codified, including, to be honest, like Agile Manifesto that came out of work in the 90s, the kind of software that was being built back in the 90s was, if we're going to be really honest, it was basically automating a few business processes. And no one was going to die based on that. In the 2000s, clearly it was about like kind of e-commerce. So ordering pizza or ordering, booking flights or hotels or what have you, all of that kind of stuff, a bit of online banking and so on. Fine, probably no one's going to die in that situation, although it gets a bit more important. But fast forward to 2024, where we are now, and software is pervasive. It covers pretty much every aspect of our lives. And if we're not careful, some of the mindset and assumptions that people have when they're building these services is, oh, I'll build this thing and then I'll move on to something else. Like I'll build this set of features and then I'll move on to something else and so on and so on. The way that the funding works doesn't think about that long-term health of that whole service. The way that some software approaches, methodologies or frameworks and things think about the incentives for developers and project managers and things also don't really lend themselves to a sense of responsibility for the long-term evolution, like the health of that service on an ongoing basis. And I think if we're not careful, we're going to hit some real problems with how these services are not really fit for purpose for society, for people, because we've just allowed sort of
and I think we've seen that already.
Standard ways of
In the past couple of years. When was it? I need to think back, but the Log4j problem that we had is like a piece of open source software that was maintained by 1 or 2 people, I think. And that was used all around the world, and that had a bug, and that was like almost every company around the world that was using this tool, they literally had to patch it, and it was like, and then people were angry at that one person that was actually delivering that piece of software for years for free. And nobody even think about that's actually is not even this person's main job, because he's not making money out of all these companies that are actually using it and in a way abusing it, because not realizing that and there's quite a couple of these kind of tools that we're depending on. And like you say, if it's running on a server and used, that might even be much more, because imagine that it's based on a person that does all of that, but that person dies, and what happens, or loses interest, like you say, it doesn't have to be that dramatic to just have a huge impact on things.
I mean, there's even some kind of software delivery approaches, which, if you peel back the layer of the onion, if you take an onion and you peel all the layers up, you get to the central bit. But the central bit for a couple of these approaches, the central idea seems to be the purpose of software development is to keep software developers interested in what they're doing. So you can work on this thing for a little bit, and then we should be looking around, what else is there inside this organization? Can we work on something else that's interesting? Can we work on something else that's interesting? Rather than long-term care and evolution of a particular service to meet a set of user needs. And neither approach is bad or good in itself, but the first approach I talked about, where we're basically trying to optimize for how exciting it is to develop the software, is not going to lead to good outcomes for people on a kidney dialysis machine, or to help make sure that the heating bill gets paid on a regular basis, and so on and so on. Like it just doesn't feel the right kind of focus. Clearly, those frameworks don't talk about it in those terms exactly, but when you start to peel away the assumptions and so on, you get to this point where their starting point is, oh, I love to develop software. I want to be developing software that interests me, rather than we're going to try and meet some user needs, and we're going to do it in a way which expects this software to evolve over 30, 40, 50, 60 years into the future. And
we cannot.
That is very different.
Yeah, we cannot even imagine. This is when did I say it? I think this week or maybe last week I talked also with the team that I'm working with about. There is actually a rocket in space that's been out there since the, I don't know, 80s, 90s, whatever. So more than a couple of decades. And this is, you cannot imagine, this is running on a computer of that time, of course, because it's out in space for so long. And so this is these are computers that, these systems, these reboot automatically, they do all that kind of stuff, because the people who designed these things, they knew that rocket will be in space for a couple of years, couple of decades, and it has to keep working. And we we cannot just go there and say, okay, let's reboot that stuff. No, if we know that there needs to be a reboot, because let's face it, computers, they're still fixed in one way or another with reboots from time to time. So we have to invent a way that it reboots itself, and the rocket, I don't know how it works, but it's just wonderful thinking about, there is a rocket somewhere in space going out for so many years, and the software was written so many years ago. The hardware is less capable than all of our phones can do, literally. And that's going on for that many decades and still sending information back to Earth. And the software that we're writing at the Earth has to keep being backwards compatible to that thing that's out in space, because there's no way you can update that. Or maybe they found a way to update that.
I think this is like Voyager 1, isn't it? It's the one that's gone outside of the solar system.
Exactly.
Yeah, amazing, absolutely amazing engineering. Yeah, really, really good.
And that's how many people. I mean, many people like. Well, my father-in-law is an architect, architect for making buildings, and I don't know how it's in different countries, but in Belgium, you're responsible for at least the first 10 years of a building. So if something goes wrong in the design or whatever, you can get accountable for these kind of things.
That's interesting. That's a bit like DevOps, isn't it? Like you build it, you run it, effectively, almost.
In a way, and I think in the very first architecture, I think in the Roman centuries, if you build a bridge, the architects had to be the first one to walk onto the bridge, as a way like, hey, you're responsible, your life depends on it. And these days in software, like architects in many ways, or well, let's say even before Agile, architects, they typically design something in their ivory tower, and then they left, and they probably are 3 projects further before that software was even into production. How could you then learn from your mistakes and everything? And there is so much things that for us we need to think about designing it for the future, and something that we cannot realize. I want to bring some other kind of thing. I worked recently for a company, a media company, and they were thinking about designing. So they have to rebuild their office. So they have to create a new office, because that office is like, I don't know, 100 years old or whatever. But you have to, if you realize that was an office building created for radio. Television didn't exist, in websites, internet, it all didn't exist. And now they want to design studios, video studios, radio studios for the next 50 years. And like, no way you can do that, because you have to build it in a way that, for me at least, I think in a way that every 5 years you can rebuild some stuff, because you don't know what technology will be there in 50 years. So you don't have to design perfectly for a building for 50 years. More like, how could we build something that whatever we do, we can recreate these studios every 5 years because technology will evolve. We didn't have, and in a way that's, we talked about with our family also about castles, I think 2 weekends ago, where if you look at, if I want to visit the castle in whatever country I go, there is electricity these days, but of course this electricity didn't exist when the castles were built, but somehow the modern architects or the people who designed and made that castle into a museum, they kind of hidden electricity somewhere in the walls, so that for us it looks that wasn't touched, but of course it was, because the electricity is everywhere. And I think, yeah, we need to think in these kind of directions. That's really wonderful.
Designing for change, just like you said at the beginning.
Exactly.
Like designing to explicitly expect things to change and to enable things to change on a regular basis, because that's what we can see from the 20th century and the trajectory, the direction of travel for how things are going to change. Absolutely, we're expecting things to change on a continuous basis, and getting familiar with changing things safely, quickly, and effectively, while still delivering value at the same time. That's stuff.
And like you say, and backwards compatibility for things that are there. So that's that's part of the big change, I would think.
In some respects, it's not hard. In some respects, it's not hard to do this stuff, but it does feel hard when we don't take into account the human aspects of all this stuff, when we don't take into account like core practices and like core agility practices. It then feels really, really hard because people are using a very different paradigm to try and make it work. But if we empower teams, we give them a good mission, the right tools, sensible cognitive load, and so on, this stuff happens.
Exactly, and I think it happens a lot to multiple kind of ways, so again, wonderful discussions and side discussions, because this was a question about introducing someone, and then we moved in all kind of different kind of things. So really wonderful. Matthew, I really want to thank you for your time, because it's been for me a wonderful time. If people want to reach out to you, what could be the best way to connect with you?
The best way, if you head to matthewskelton.com,
and that should be the website.
Matthewskelton.net at the moment will get you there as well. The new website that I've got will be at matthewskelton.com.
Okay.
And then follow the links from there, basically.
That's
you'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm no longer using Twitter or X. On Mastodon as well, and in some other communities around and about. If you head to matthewskelton.com, you'll find enough links from there to find
all the others, and all your new projects. When you're thinking about the podcast or other things, I assume they will come there as well.
They'll appear there, exactly.
Okay, well, I really want to thank you for your time. It's been a wonderful conversation in, like I said, in all kind of directions. But yeah, for me, this is a really nice way.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.